You know, folks, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. You wake up this morning, you grab your phone, which was probably made in China, by the way, that's coming up, and you check the news, and right there, staring you in the face, is a story about how the Pentagon has finally gotten around to putting some of China's biggest companies on a list, an official list, a list that says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but barely, hey, these guys are helping build the Chinese military. Now, the companies on this list, are you sitting down? Alibaba, Baidu, BYD. You know BYD, of course you do. Because if you've been paying any attention at all to what's been happening in the American car market, you have heard BYD mentioned every single time someone in Washington, someone in Silicon Valley, someone in the environmental movement talks about the glorious electric vehicle revolution, the green future, the beautiful, clean, sustainable, wonderful world where we all drive around in little electric cars. Made in China, by a company that, according to the United States Pentagon, is helping the People's Liberation Army. And here is the part that gets me. Here is the part that I sit here and I have to laugh. I have to laugh because if I didn't laugh, I'd have to start throwing things. And we have nice equipment in this studio. The American consumer has been lectured for years about buying a gas-powered truck, told they were killing the planet, told they needed to sacrifice, to transition, to get with the program. And the program, it turns out, pointed straight to Beijing. You can't make this up. You simply cannot make it up. I'm Rick LeBeau, this is Rush Hour, and we are just getting started. All right, folks, let's dig into this because it deserves the full treatment today. The Pentagon, the Department of Defense of the United States of America, has officially designated Alibaba, BYD, and Baidu as Chinese military companies. Now, let me explain what that actually means in plain English, because our friends in the drive-by media are going to spend about 45 seconds on this before going back to telling you about whatever the president wore to last night's basketball game. What the Pentagon designation does is prevent these companies from getting U.S. defense contracts. That's the immediate practical effect. But what it signals, what it says out loud, officially, with the full weight of the American government behind it, is that these are not just companies. These are instruments of the Chinese Communist Party's military ambitions. Let's talk about BYD for a second, because this one really is something. BYD, Build Your Dreams, that's their slogan, isn't that nice, is the largest electric vehicle manufacturer on the planet. They have been absolutely flooding global markets with cheap electric cars. And for years, the green energy crowd in this country has practically been handing out pamphlets about them. The environmentalists loved them. The "we must transition away from fossil fuels" crowd loved them. A bunch of politicians loved them because they could point to BYD and say, see, electric vehicles are the future, they're affordable, they're everywhere. And the whole time, the Pentagon is now telling us this company has ties to the Chinese military. Well, isn't that something? Now look, I want to be precise here because I'm always precise. The designation on this list doesn't mean these companies are building tanks in the parking lot. What it means is that under U.S. law, specifically something called Section 1260H of the National Defense Authorization Act, these companies are considered to have material ties to China's military-industrial apparatus. The Chinese government has a documented policy, has had it for decades, called military-civil fusion. The idea is simple. Every major company, every university, every tech firm in China is expected to share its technology, its data, its capabilities with the People's Liberation Army when asked. No exceptions, no getting out of it. That's the law in China. So when you buy a BYD car, when you use Alibaba's cloud services, when you search on Baidu, you are feeding an ecosystem that, by the Chinese government's own design, flows back into their military. I'm going to use an analogy here. Imagine you're a farmer, and your neighbor has been coming over and buying your corn. Real friendly guy, good prices, you like him fine, and then one day you find out that everything you've been selling him, he's been feeding to an army that has been marching slowly, steadily, patiently in your direction. That is what we have been doing with China for 30 years, selling them the corn, taking the money, telling ourselves it was just business. The globalists, and I use that word advisedly, I use it specifically, told us for 30 years that if we just traded with China, if we just opened our markets, if we just invited them into the World Trade Organization and treated them like a normal country, they would liberalize, they would democratize, they'd become more like us. The theory was that economic engagement would produce political change. How's that working out? They got richer, they got more powerful, they built islands in the South China Sea, they built the largest navy on the planet, they modernized their nuclear arsenal, they stole our intellectual property systematically on an industrial scale, and they used it to build industries that now compete with ours. And the whole time, the Harvard-educated economists and the Wall Street guys and the foreign policy establishment were telling us this was fine. This was the plan. This was wisdom. These are the same people who act surprised every time I'm right about something. Now, here's where it gets a little complicated, and I want to be fair. Adding a company to this Pentagon list doesn't automatically mean all business with them is prohibited. American companies can still do business with firms on this list in most cases. It's mainly about federal defense contracts. So this is not a full ban. It is a designation. It is a signal, and signals matter, especially when they come from the Pentagon and when they name some of the biggest companies in the world. But here's the part that gets me the most, folks. Here is the part that should make every single person who was ever lectured by a progressive about their gasoline car stop and think for a very long moment. The political left in this country has spent the better part of a decade pushing the electric vehicle agenda. Government subsidies, mandates, regulations designed to make gas-powered cars more expensive and harder to sell, all in service of this glorious green transition. And the beneficiary of all of it, the company that was positioned to flood our market with cheap electric cars while Detroit and American auto workers struggled to keep up, is now officially designated by our own Pentagon as a Chinese military company. The left wanted you to trade your F-150 for a car made by an arm of the Chinese military. They didn't know that, I'll be charitable, but they also didn't ask. And that is the problem. They never ask. They have a vision, they have a plan, they have a narrative, and anyone who raises questions about where all this stuff comes from and who benefits and what the national security implications are, that person gets called a xenophobe or a protectionist or just hopelessly old-fashioned. Well, the Pentagon doesn't seem to think it's old-fashioned. The Pentagon seems to think it's a pretty serious deal. And you know what? I agree with the Pentagon on this one. This designation should have happened sooner. Alibaba has been operating massive cloud data centers around the world for years. Baidu has been a dominant player in artificial intelligence research, and AI, folks, is not just a tech product. AI is going to determine military dominance in the 21st century more than any weapon system you can name. And China knows it. They have said so publicly. Their government documents say so.
They are not hiding it. We are the ones who were not paying attention.
Now, I want to say one more thing before we move on, and this is important. This move, this Pentagon list, it matters. It sends a message. It is the kind of move that an administration actually willing to take China seriously makes. And I want to give credit where it is due. We've had administrations, and I'm not going to name them all, but pick a couple who treated China like a valued business partner, a fellow stakeholder in the global order, a country that just needed a little more time and a little more access to figure out that freedom was the answer. Those days, I hope, are over, because China is not going to liberalize itself. The Chinese Communist Party is not going to voluntarily give up control.
And every dollar that flows into these companies flows,
at least in some measure, into a system that is actively competing with us. Militarily, technologically, economically, in every corner of the world. Wake up, folks. The Pentagon just told you, in official language, with official designations, what a lot of us have been saying for a very long time. As usual, we were just a few years early. All right, let's hit a few more before we let you go today. First up, a federal judge has struck down Trump's $100,000 fee on H-1B visas. For those who don't follow immigration policy in the weeds, the H-1B is the main visa pathway that tech companies, hospitals, and universities use to bring in high-skilled foreign workers. Trump had imposed a $100,000 fee on those visas. A judge just said that fee is unlawful. Now, I want to be honest here, because I always am. The H-1B issue is genuinely complicated. On one hand, you have American companies saying they cannot find enough engineers, enough specialized workers, and they need to be able to hire from the global talent pool. On the other hand, you have American workers, American engineers, American programmers, who say they keep getting passed over for cheaper foreign workers, and that the visa program has been used not to fill genuine gaps, but to undercut American wages. Both of those things can be true at the same time. That's the part Washington never quite grasps. But here is the part that gets me about this particular story: a judge declaring a fee unlawful. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I know many of you out there are. But $100,000 is a substantial fee. And the argument the administration would make is that it changes the calculus for companies that have been using this visa as a cheap labor arbitrage rather than a genuine talent pipeline. You want to bring in a truly irreplaceable specialist? $100,000 is worth it. You want to bring in someone just to pay them less than the going American rate? Suddenly the math looks different. A judge apparently disagrees. The courts and the executive branch going at it again. Watch this space, because this is not the last we will hear about H-1B. Next, the Trump administration is moving to strip citizenship from 17 Americans. Denaturalization, it's called. These are people who were convicted of crimes including healthcare fraud, wire fraud, things of that nature. Denaturalization is rare. It's been historically rare. And I expect our friends in the drive-by media to cover this story as if it is the beginning of some kind of dystopian nightmare where citizenship means nothing. They are going to find the most sympathetic possible case, and they are going to put that person on television every single night for 2 weeks. Here's what I will say. If you came to this country, you took an oath, you became a citizen, And then you defrauded the American healthcare system. You stole money from American taxpayers. The idea that your citizenship is on the table, I find it hard to get very worked up on your behalf. I'm sorry, I just do. Citizenship is not supposed to be a shield that you acquire and then use to operate criminal enterprises with legal impunity. This is going to be litigated. It will absolutely be litigated.
But the underlying principle that citizenship carries obligations, not just protections, that principle is not crazy. That principle is, in fact, American. And finally, and this one gave me a genuine laugh today, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, has suspended its chief prosecutor, a fellow named Karim Khan, suspended amid sexual misconduct allegations that have apparently been dragging on for more than 2 years. Now, the International Criminal Court is the institution that issued an arrest warrant for, among others, the sitting Prime Minister of Israel, the institution that fancies itself the supreme arbiter of international justice, the court that lectures the rest of the world about accountability, about rule of law, about the standards of civilized behavior, and their top guy has been suspended for sexual misconduct. That has been going on for 2 years. 2 years, folks. While they were busy issuing warrants and holding press conferences and positioning themselves as the conscience of humanity. I'm not going to make a major sermon out of this. I will just say there is something about institutions that spend all their time judging everyone else that makes me want to take a very long look at what's going on inside their own walls. The ICC has always struck me as a club for people who think they were born to run the world and never quite got the job. And now we find out the club has its own problems. Color me shocked. All right, folks, before I let you go, and I know you've got things to do, places to be, I appreciate every minute you give me. I genuinely do. Let me leave you with this. The story today about China, about these companies being labeled as military companies, that story is bigger than it sounds. It sounds like a bureaucratic list. It sounds like a policy designation. But what it actually is a formal, official acknowledgement that the world we were told we were building, this interconnected, peaceful, everyone does business together and gets along world, is not the world we actually got. We got a world where the Chinese Communist Party used our openness against us, used our free markets, our universities, our capital, our technology, our goodwill, and built something that is now, by our own Pentagon's accounting, a military competitor with tentacles in every product, every platform, every supply chain. That doesn't mean the answer is to panic. The American people don't panic. That's not what we do. What it means is pay attention. Be skeptical. When someone tells you that the cheap product, the easy deal, the path of least resistance is also the righteous choice, ask a few questions. Find out who's actually getting rich. Find out what's actually being built on the other end of that transaction. Common sense has been declared illegal by the elites of this country. The experts have been wrong, spectacularly, demonstrably wrong, about China, about trade, about what happens when you hollow out your industrial base in exchange for cheaper consumer goods. The American people, the regular people, the ones who actually make things and build things and drive the trucks and work the factories, they knew something was off. They've known for a long time. They just didn't have anyone in charge who was willing to say it out loud. We're getting there, slowly, but we're getting there. All right? That's all I've got for today. You've been great company, as always. You're the reason I show up. You know that. I'm Rick LeBeau. This has been Rush Hour, same time tomorrow, if they let us back on.